Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the wasmCloud community meeting. Hopefully my connection is okay enough to announce this. Just gonna check on a couple of things. I'm actually at a conference right now, not at home, so excited to be tuning into this. But we've got a pretty wash-loaded agenda today. We're going to be talking about two of the new experimental flags that are coming in. And if you weren't in the last week's meeting, we can also talk a little bit about the experimental flag in Wash. And then we're going to talk about the Wash 0.18 release, which just finally landed yesterday and has a whole suite of new features that we're going to talk about. And then I've just kind of left some time at the end for us to generally talk about the developer iteration loop, people's wants, things that people like and dislike, and all of those things. So without further preamble, I think we can go ahead and hand it over to Taylor, who's going to talk about wash capture and the experimental.
Says wash spy on the agenda, so I'm doing both. Pew pew pew. Okay. Let me go ahead and share.
Yeah, I know that we talked about wash spy last week, but I love it so much that I'm going to be happy to see it again. I actually just got a chance to use it yesterday, and I was freaking out about it. Okay, all right, go.
Okay. Behold, I have things spun up. In case you didn't know, WebAssembly's running too, but I was not spinning this up with WebAssembly at the time, so I just spun it all up. But WebAssembly is running in here as well. This is the new Wash 0.18 that was just released yesterday, thanks to Brooks. And in case you didn't see this last week, we have our Echo and KV counter that are running, and I'm going to show two different things that are going on here. Well, the first things first. I will show off wash capture for a second. So we have a new command called wash capture. It's behind the experimental flag, and in case you were not here at the last meeting, the wash experimental flag is something we started introducing for things we're not entirely sure are good ideas yet, but we want to get out there for people to try. And so you just have to put on, if you try to run this command without doing the wash experimental equals true, you're going to end up with it just saying, sorry, you need to set the flag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable wash capture. So now I have what it's actually doing underneath the hood, in case you're curious, is it's creating a capture stream right here. And actually, look, it looks like it was already there from before. And this sets up basically a sliding window. So the idea behind wash capture is that if you're familiar with gaming, you often have a button that you can press that can capture the last like 30 seconds or 60 seconds of video that you did, so you can share that video or that clip. So you get that nice headshot playing Halo or whatever, and you grab that video. That's what generally happens. So the idea was, well, why can't we do that for like debugging purposes with wasmCloud? So this sets up something by default as a sliding window of an hour, and it captures all the different invocations that you set up. You could also set it up on your own to capture your own invocations if you wanted. But that captures every event that's going on. We'll come back to that once I demo wash spy one more time. So I'm going to go ahead and wash spy on KV counter. So I don't have to specify an actor ID. It already knows that, like, hey, I have a KV counter actor running. And so now if I come and I curl the API counter right here. So I am just calling those things, and you'll see that we see from the HTTP server to the KV counter, from the KV counter to the Redis key value store, and we can see the body that's going back and forth here. So I'm able to watch what's going on. It helps with some debugging. Eventually, we'll want to add in some stuff where it can even like capture the responses, because this is a request response pattern, but this gets us started. So that's what wash spy does. But the wash capture, which is the other one we've been talking about, is I'll go ahead and hit the echo actor as well just a couple times. So I have it. And then, you know what, let's say I had a bug with this and I want to capture what just happened. I can go wash capture. Oops. And because it's enabled, it'll go ahead and grab it. It'll take a second while it goes and grabs all the messages, and it outputs it to a tarball. And we call it like just a wash capture file. It's just a tarball. And so now I have that like locally, I have this wash capture tarball. And there's this nice command we have called replay, where I can take this capture file and it will actually play through all the events. There's also a capture of the host inventory in there. We don't expose that. You can unpack it and see the JSON for it. But this just replayed all those messages from the last capture window. But what's nice is I can actually filter based on like what's going on. So if I want to filter like all HTTP requests, I can say provider ID. And now I'm only getting HTTP server stuff. Now let's say I'm doing we have the counter, I believe. Yeah. So let's say we just want to do one with the like to the all HTTP requests to the KV counter. I can come back here and say, I'm going to do this provider ID and this actor ID. And so now I'm getting just the HTTP request to the actor and the provider ID. So I can also go through and say, I actually just want to check the database calls. So I'm going to come over here and I want to check everything that has to do with the KV Redis provider. And so then I'm able to filter it down. And so I can also, if I want to, do this basically interactive. And it's going to step through one at a time, kind of like a debugger. This isn't perfect. We're hoping to add even more cool features to this in the future to like make debugging really easy. But at this stage, you can actually like go through and filter through each like message or each thing that's going on to see each thing as it happened. So basically, I'm able to entirely like to slide, like take this sliding window and capture whatever I just found and discover it, like if I discovered a bug, and save it for later debugging purposes. So down here, you can also disable this when you're done. And that's actually just going to do delete that stream, and then it's not there anymore. So there you go. That's wash capture and wash spy. Any questions? Take silence as a good thing. So anyway, there you go. That is the demo for those new features.
And Taylor, those two, well, we'll talk about it in just a second in the release notes, but those two actually did make it into 0.18. And so you can actually run them now as long as you install the latest version and add that experimental flag. You get a warning if you don't add experimental, it'll tell you what to do. But they are out now, so everybody is welcome to try them out and let us know. All right, next on the agenda is a demo of Wash Dev, another exciting experimental feature that will be in shortly. Victor, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Brooks. Yeah, so we've been working on a feature called Wash Dev as well, sort of in that same vein of sort of debuggability and a better development process. So I'll share my screen here, and I'll give a little demo of what it can do. Okay, so here we've got we're inside the examples repo. So just looking at the basic echo actor, which is pretty simple, right? So it just talks to an HTTP server provider and echoes whatever request it gets back to whoever sent it, right? The usual echo. And so here, and just a little demo of what it looks like when you forget to put the experimental flag on. So if you type wash dev, you'll get, a nice little warning that tells you that it's still experimental. Of course, this will go away if we decide to stabilize, but this is exactly what Taylor described earlier. So then let's go and we'll run it. And so what happens is it starts off and realizes there's no host running real quick. So what it does is it starts a wasmCloud instance, waits for it to become reachable. And then once it's reachable, you can see the logs of a wasmCloud host right here. So there's multiple ways that you can do this. And so here it found the host eventually, right? Once you can see the logs from the host right above here. And then what it's done is it actually started the project build. So this project on the left here, the code here on the left, is being built continuously by the process in the right. So it depends on the configuration you want to use. So like sometimes maybe you want to run the wasmCloud instance as a sub process, or maybe you want to run it detached. Like there are differences and sort of trade-offs for both of those approaches, but those are all configurable. And basically this process will wait regardless of how you've launched Wash, whether you've detached it or whether you haven't. The process will wait until you make a change to any of the files in the repo, or I should say repo, but I really mean the folder you're in, right? Like you could be in a project that's not necessarily a Git repo, whatever. And it makes sure to reload your actor, the actor that's being developed, when any file changes happen. So to show you that the host is actually running here on the right side, what I'll do is just jump to my browser real quick. Right now it's not pointed at anything, but we're going to go to 4000, which is the usual port for wasmCloud, and we'll see that the Echo actor is actually running. So at this point, it's already actually built the local actor I had, pushed it up, it's running in wasmCloud. I know that Echo actor needs an HTTP server, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run one real quick. So what I did was I started a provider from the registry and just using the default options, right? So the default options, by default, you'll have port 8000 as the place where requests will go to. So I'll refresh that here and we can see, if I zoom all the way in, that we've got the request that was sent over. Let's say, right, if we add to the query string, we get the query string back. So Echo is working. All of this is sort of normal at this point, right? This is what you could have done manually quite easily. So what I'll do here is I'll jump back to the terminal and we're going to just make a little change here. So I'm going to add this and save it. And you see over to the right that we've already started and finished compiling this project. So I'm going to go back to the browser and I'm going to just simply refresh, right? And then here you see that extra value, right? So that's the functionality of sort of getting an actor rebuilt locally as quickly as possible and having it be testable right in the browser. So that's basically the idea behind WashDev, and a quick demo of how it works. Again, this is still experimental, but it's a feature that seems likely to stabilize, especially if we get good feedback. And that's one thing that I think everyone can help with, is just trying it out and seeing what options they'd like, or how much this tool really accelerates your workflow. And that's what we'd like it to do. So Brooks, I'll pass it back to you.
Victor, that I haven't seen it working end to end. That's really sweet. I have a couple of questions, but I will
fire away.
Oh yeah. I'll open up the floor just so that I don't monopolize the whole time. Anybody have any questions, comments for Victor? Okay. then I will go forward with my questions. So this is really sweet for developing on an actor. The first thing that I wanted to ask is how, because I know you have it all. How do you have it all locally? How does it actually start the actor after it builds? So like we build the WebAssembly module and you launch the host kind of at the same time. How is that? Is that pushing to a local registry? How is that getting there?
Yeah, so there's some functionality for starting an actor actually from file. So basically what you can do is use a local file path, kind of like as in the form of a URI. And so that's how WashDev works right now. It's possible to do other things, but right now it uses the local file that you build after you I should say build and sign, right? Because the artifacts are signed as is usual.
Okay, so you're using that, and then you said that basically what it does is it watches that file locally. So as soon as you make, is it does it watch all of the files in the project like React, or is it triggered kind of when you run build? How does that work?
Yeah, so it'll watch files in the folder, and then based on those, kick off a rebuild, which will change the generated file. Right, there's actually a little bit of logic in there to turn off the watching right during the building, because otherwise you'd get into a loop, right? Because the build process generates a WASM file, and if you were to trigger on the WASM file generated, you would start trying to build again and never end. So I ran into that manually, so I can tell you that's how that works. But yeah, so it's basically just triggered on files inside the folder that's running in.
Cool. Awesome. I really like how it's really focused on like developing a single actor. Like it'll start that up for you, and then you're free to kind of go in. Maybe you could use Wadum for this, but just generally like put the providers to get and links together just to like get that initial environment up. My other question was, can you do this with a currently running host, so that like you could do this with multiple actors, like basically have a wash dev that's not responsible for running a host, just responsible for watching an actor? Does that work?
Yeah. So it actually tries to just detect if there's a host running, right? So I didn't have a host running when I started it, which is why it sort of printed out that message that was like, couldn't find a host, so gonna start one. But yeah, it definitely works if you just decide to run a host yourself, and like one you want to manage, let's say. Yeah, so that was I know that's a key use case, and I do like the idea of using Wadum or Wadam, however we like to say it, as an orchestration layer, because obviously there's a little bit of friction where I had to go in there and start the HTTP server provider, but that could obviously be done. There's lots of ways we can do that, right? We can, if we know what kind of thing we're running, we can actually just try and start it from inside Wash. But obviously, ideally, it would be declarative in the way that Wadam helps us be. So that's pretty cool. And there's also the idea of passing Wadam file and then actually just modifying it on the fly, right? So like you can actually pick spots of that Wadam file to pull out and pull back and throw back in change, right? Because we're because it's YAML, so it's all programmatically easy to edit. But all that's in the future. And so right now works on actors great. And then we'll see what's next.
Awesome. I can really see the potential for this one to be a quickly unmarked experimental one, because I want to use it for everything. I think probably some of the things that we're going to need to think about will be the interaction with Wadum and how we want to handle that, because it would be nice if you had a clean slate to go in an actor repo and do something, just say wash dev, and it launches the host, it launches the actor, and watches it, and it launches all the providers and links and everything that you need. So that basically you can just like get started right away, and you don't have to, if you pick up and put down the developer loop, you don't have to restart those providers. That'll be really interesting. But like you said, we're totally going to continue to add to this and go from there.
Yeah, and
Well,
I think
cool.
even in the like there are some intermediary steps that are probably pretty easy, like just detecting if there's the HTTP server capability is there, then we know that we should at least have one HTTP server, and you can do at least the bare minimum, which is just starting the provider manually. But yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Super cool. Anybody else have any other questions for Victor on WashDev? Just stalling on time while I can pull something up in the background. Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Victor. This is really awesome. I think that this is going to be, I've got it in my notes here that this will be something that we release with Wash 0.19. And I know, speaking of that, Wash 0.18 was kind of something that we added a good bit of features into, which is why I want to talk about it here. But I think I'd like to get 0.19 out a little bit quicker on the cadence from 0.17. So I think that naturally leads as a good segue into the next part of the call, which is just talking about 0.18. So in the Wash repository now, you can now see that we have 0.18 out. This came with washlib 0.9, which includes most of the functionality that we added to this release. It's just this is the CLI. And I noticed something in our release notes, actually, that there's a lot of Dependabot output now in our generated release notes. So I think what we're going to be looking into, and this may be a good topic for the next community call, is a strategy for generating these release notes in a meaningful way, because I kind of separated them out manually, but there are just as many Dependabot bumps as there are features in this one. So I want to make sure that it's kind of obvious what is new that's coming to Wash and wasmCloud, and not kind of lost in this sea of patch bumps for Dependabot. But in general, for this one, I want to call out some of the bigger features that are coming in this, including the flattening of some of our more verbose commands from like wash control link into wash link, wash control start and stop into wash start and stop. Some various improvements from Roman and other people in the wasmCloud community, just like fixing some of our build and user experience things, just miscellaneous things around the Wash CLI, including WADM by default. When you run wash up, you can obviously disable it with, I think it's -- disable WADM. But now the wash app subcommand is fully functional. And I'm actually going to solicit some feedback here in just a second about this. Additionally, obviously, what Taylor added around wash spy comes in with the experimental flag and wash capture. Both of those have made it into this release. And last but not least, really a thin wrapper by me around the great work that Roman put together in the wasmCloud OTP repository is wash burritos, which we keep saying that, and it's so funny if it's said out of context. Really, all it means is that the wasmCloud host that Wash is going to be running is more static, more platform independent. So on Mac and Windows, it doesn't have any platform dependencies. And on Linux, a big deal is the fact that you don't have to install OpenSSL anymore in order to run wasmCloud. It's statically built as a dependency, which is awesome. I also want to give a shout out to Lee, who got their first contribution and second and third, it looks like, in this release. It's pretty cool that they GitHub kind of calls this out, but thank you, Lee. Some really awesome improvements around the around the dev container here, which I personally have been using more and more often for just little small fixes where I just want something to launch, especially if I'm on my other machine. So definitely go give this one a try today. It's available on all of our package managers and all that stuff. So you should be able to upgrade right into it. And what we're going to be doing with this release, we're also going to be updating some of our introductory tutorials and some of the content in our documentation, because Wadum is generally available and being used to run applications. It really makes some of the things in our introductory tutorials, like instead of clicking around in the wasmCloud dashboard, just applying a manifest, a lot easier. So some of the work that I put together this morning was just like a hello world tutorial with wasmCloud. And without going all the way into this, it basically starts by deploying a Wadum manifest. And it's there by default. It's great to be able to start a bunch of resources with one command. But of course, Wadum isn't going to be required to run wasmCloud things. So for those of you who are in the community Slack, I'm going to be sending this out to solicit some feedback. I'd love to get the thoughts of the community on some of these new type of introductory tutorials. If you're not in the Slack, if you're tuning in on Twitter or YouTube or LinkedIn or any of the things that we stream to, you can actually just join at slack.wasmcloud.com. There's a link at the bottom of our webpage. We'd love to have you in the community. All right. That's all that I wanted to talk about around WASH 0.18. Anybody have any questions around some of the new features or what we've put in the last release? Awesome. Well, I've carved out a little bit of time at the end of this call. I know that I wanted the focus to be on the demos because some of the new experimental things are really exciting. And I carved out a little bit of time for talking about the WASH developer iteration loop. I honestly feel like I believe I queued that up before I knew that we would be demoing all of the cool things that we've been working on the developer iteration loop. And I think I've gotten to talk about a lot of the agenda items that I wanted to talk about there. Wash Dev really puts the cherry on the cake, whatever, for me. God, I can't do the metaphors today.
You're like old Brooks. We're getting old Brooks.
Yeah.
I'm putting the cherry on my cake. I'm putting the cherry. That's what, sorry.
So anyways, I'm still happy to have a discussion if there are more points that people want to talk about around the WASH iteration loop. Jordan, you've been a little quiet, and I hope you don't mind that I'm calling you out here. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on some of this new stuff because, well, you've done a lot of wasmCloud development. You've been through the developer iteration loop a good bit, especially with writing Go, and kind of just want to hear your thoughts on if you feel like this is going to be a fun thing to develop with, if there's more that you'd like to see, things like that. You can also just give me a thumbs down emoji if you can't or don't want to talk. It's fine.
You want me to go on record?
Yeah, sure.
I can speak from two hats. From the second of which is not as positive. From the developer's perspective, I love it, right? I've been wash spying forever by Nat's sub arrow and doing it the hard way, right? So it definitely makes life a lot easier. Dev mode seems cool. I'll have to play with it. I don't really know how it'll change my loop, but it seems fun. Yeah, and then replay is just fun. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm going to play with it. See, we'll do something with it. My problem that I'm having comes from having audited many companies from a security perspective for a long time. Wash is becoming very powerful, and Wash drops keys in a lot of places, and Wash is very, very easy to misconfigure, making Wash a very big security concern from my perspective. Not only can it change out actors and providers, it can now just like spy and drop artifacts that can then just be egressed off the machine. Granted, I've read Taylor's documentation on like how to properly lock down in keys, but I spent a lot of time in in keys, and they're also very easy to mess up. And after about 3 or 4 times you haven't added the right subject, you just start adding carrots and arrows and stars because it gets frustrating. So what I would like to see is Wash start implementing some subcommands that promote security, maybe like Wash system key, that's the one you can share to use to like kind of lock it down or something. But those are really my big concerns. From a developer's perspective, it's great. From a security perspective, it scares me a lot.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've had a few inklings of a discussion, but not really a full one around both Wash and the wasmCloud dashboard. If they're meant to be developer tools, production infrastructure, like provisioning tools, production interaction tools, or all of them, or none of the above, if that makes sense. Because I see the distinction that you're calling out. Wash is really growing very well as a developer tool, and the power is probably more than you would want if you are interacting with a running production wasmCloud lattice. Is that a fair distillation?
Yeah, and the fact that it runs, not escalated, right? So in user land, so like an adversary doesn't even have to like escalate to use it. He just like pops your machine because you clicked on a phishing email and he has you. So yeah.
I think that's actually not bad. I think there's we could probably wrap some of the stuff that helps provision things into Wash. The problem is like we try to make the deployment mechanism as flexible as possible, but we could probably get the most common ones into Wash Lockdown, because like, for example, in Cosmonic, you're not getting anything. We've locked down like the topic. So when you get like your credentials, even if you are using Wash, which you technically can right against it, you can't do certain things like outside of that cluster. And so like it's kind of an interesting conversation, because we want to keep that flexibility around for people, because there could be various ways you want to distribute this. Like it's very different from a team that just wants to run like a single thing somewhere, where someone wants to run something more distributed. So I think I'm trying to think of ways we can maybe like incorporate that. And I know the Wash Lockdown was like a semi, like, but I think it's a really good, like, I don't know if we call it Wash Lockdown or Wash. I'm trying to think of another funny name for it, but like something like that can maybe help like the configuration, so it's not so like giving you the foot gun to shoot yourself with, like you were saying, Jordan.
Yeah. And that's kind of why last week I asked, because obviously I've read most of the docs. I asked how is wasmCloud being like, how are we telling people to do it in production, right? Because like wash up scares me, because then it drops keys, and if you forget to clean up keys, or if you forget to copy them to somewhere secure, then you're kind of like foobar. So I spent a lot of time the last 2 weeks actually just deploying things from the host binary to see what that feels like. And yeah, obviously it's nowhere near as nice as wash up. However, it's working, but nonetheless, I get what you're saying, Taylor. I think so. Like Wash's connectivity, I don't know. Even if there was like some sort of way like time out the creds, right? Because I know like InKeys has a JWT attached. I don't know if we're using that part of it, but like maybe like wash anything every once in a while required some sort of reauthentication. I know that kind of defeats the purpose of decentralized authentication, but it's scary, man.
I'm wondering what's the what kind of threat model are you thinking about here? Are you thinking about someone running locally and doing something wrong, or like are you thinking of running wasm if you're running wasmCloud in like a sort of distributed situation, like on a computer that's not yours, essentially, right? Just like not the one in front of you, like a remote one. Because like when I think of the first case, I think of something like maybe because you know how like Brew has Brew Doctor, right? And you can kind of see like a readout of like, oh, you have these files on the disk. They're not right because like on the same machine, there's a limit to how much you can make, how secure you can make things, right? It's just like you've got file level security, you've got encryption at rest, but that's all you have because you know if someone's on your machine, they're on your machine. But so I'm curious because it changes how we could approach it.
So one of the things that sticks out in my mind is the host file, right? What do we call it? The underscore host file, because it drops everywhere. If I had $1 for everyone I found in a rogue spot on my machine, because we just drop them everywhere with like a seed in it, I'd have a lot of dollars. So that's one, and I don't really know how we like doctor that because it can be anywhere. And my second thought is if wash up is the prescribed method the team recommends for production, which I don't know it is, but if it is, right, and then there's some like someone forgets to clean up the wash keys folder, right? There's a lot of secrets in there, and the threat model I'm thinking of is you only have to pop one thing. You don't even have to escalate, right? Because all this runs in an non-root user place. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. Brooks put me on the spot, so my brain doesn't really work when I do that. But that's kind of what I'm thinking, right? Having audited more networks than I care to admit in my life. So yeah. However, from a developer's perspective, I love all this.
I'm wondering if so there are levels, right? To like isolation and how you do it, right? And you've got like containers as a first step, then like virtual machines as the second step, right? Like if you want to really protect a process, there's only so many like ways you can do it, right? There's like, then you've got like the old school like user level sort of resource setting and stuff like that. I'm wondering if so there's the one problem of just like of configuration could be everywhere and shouldn't ideally be everywhere, right? And maybe we shouldn't automatically create it, right? Like in a production environment, like maybe just fail immediately rather than dropping it on disk, or pull it from somewhere secure, right? Those are all features. So like that's one thing. That's like protecting the startup process, or sort of it's less protected. Maybe it's more like locking down or sort of making the startup process a little bit more secure. And then there's the problem of actual process isolation. So it's like I have these sound separate, like separate points, because I mean all of it's relevant, but it's like they sound like separate points, and I'm thinking it sounds like the process isolation is one solution, and then changing the startup process and making that a little bit more consistent, and like maybe not putting creds in too many places, or like consolidating configuration and secrets is another thing. Do you think that like sort of accurately represents what you were getting at?
And Jordan's gone. Yeah, Victor,
Maybe
I
he's
think
on
you're
ours.
right. I think there's like Jordan is definitely concerned with the writing out secrets to disk, which I think we certainly should audit, especially around wash up. Our mechanism now of host config it was nice for launching multiple hosts before we had wash up, but now we have it. And I think we should probably remove that mechanism by default. It could be something you opt into, maybe. Around wash keys getting generated when you build actors, and forgetting that they exist. I think that would be a good thing to take a look at. So there's like the local config, as you said, there's actual process isolation around wasmCloud, which is I think probably the most in-depth one that we haven't put as much effort into. And then actually locking down a NATS connection. I think that we have some basic documentation around like what you could do to start. Taylor wrote some of that for Wadham, but that is ultimately the most important thing around locking down a wasmCloud lattice. It's around the connection to NATS, because all the action that a host takes are in response to control interface commands. If you're starting and stopping hosts, starting and stopping actors, providers, all those things, that's all done via a NATS message to the control interface. And all of the compute, all the RPC that happens in a lattice is done over the RPC connection. Those are actually separate within a lattice, the different connections. So you can have a lockdown connection for the control interface and for RPC, and they can be separate. So even if you were to leak a key for the control interface, somebody could, stop all of your actors, for example, but they couldn't forge an RPC call and shoot it into the lattice. Or, maybe they get access to the RPC connection, and then you could forge a request, but then you can only send it through the valid paths that you've already defined. That's kind of the interesting thing around it. And I wish Kevin was here, because I think he would have a good time answering this one. But I think some really in-depth documentation, or maybe even a blog post around like NATS is the key to security in wasmCloud and not just networking, would be really interesting, because it is it's very locked down there, and it's difficult to see from the default perspective, because we set up like, here's a NAT server and here's all your connections, go wild. So it'd be good to detail that.
I do think there is room for, like what I was saying in the chat. So for those who are not in the Zoom meeting and watching this live stream or recorded later, it'd be really nice if we could like have like custom key storage stuff. So by default, it'll save to disk, like in the file, in like the washer, like we're doing right now for keys, which I think we are saving those with the proper permissions. At least they're all 600, that kind of stuff. But like, it'd be really nice if we had like an implementation for Vault and for like password managers and or credential managers on the system, kind of like what like Docker does at this point, when you do like a Docker login, and have like keys and stuff stored in there by default, could be interesting. But also, even if we just have those as options people could do, it would be really good, especially when people start using and deploying bigger production environments of wasmCloud, because then they can have the ability to hook it into whatever like kind of secret vaults types of things. So just an idea there that we could do. Yeah, bring your own key storage kind of thing. Yeah, and Justin, that's what I think I was hopefully like, that's kind of like the thought I was thinking is there. I generate a key and then like it technically goes off my machine or into a vault somewhere or whatever. I think that could be really useful. I'd really want to like pilot this with someone who's starting to deploy like a production cluster to see what the need would be, because that'd be really, really interesting. And we could then like address it as a community using an actual case study of someone trying to do something.
Yeah, Justin.
I was going to say, so there's also another aspect there that could be useful for auditing, right? So let's say you create those keys, that key is now associated with you. And for, well, I'm sorry, what's the group before you? You know something else, you've already thought about it.
No. So go
Oh,
ahead.
that's just up from before, I think.
Yeah, just from an auditing standpoint, I think that could be something that an enterprise customer might be drawn to.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Trying to think around. Actually, Justin, would you mind expanding a little bit more on that, on like what parts of like the auditability an enterprise customer would be really into? I'd love to keep that going. Just a little short on ideas.
So say I, as a developer in my distributed team, am working on creating functions and or capabilities. When I create a key or my local file system creates a key, that key, similar to how we're doing like multiple signs, right, on different keys, so multiple sources of signatures on that key, I can then use those signatures to trace back, okay, who created this? It's like a get blame for the development work that was done in my, 3-node cluster that's running across the US or something. It's traceability back to source of development.
Yeah, that would be really cool. And the Nats in key hierarchy is really robust. Like you can go many different levels in terms of, locking things down to the point where each key could be drawn back to like the individual developer that actually signed the thing. It's all there. It's a little complex to mint all of your keys from scratch. This would totally be something you'd be interested in doing if you're running a production system in wasmCloud or with wasmCloud. Taylor, I'll let you go ahead and.
I know we've been keeping an eye on as maintainers, the new stuff coming out in Nats 2.10 around being able to kind of like issue credentials, dynamic credentials on the fly based on things. So like there's going to be, hopefully that story is going to be easier, because that is one of the hardest things about the like Brooke said, the distributed key model there is very powerful because you're able to like tie things to very specific identities and users, and really dial down like what each thing has access to. But it is a little bit more complex to mint those credentials. And then like you have the actual like this thing of like being able to mint like a temporary credential or a thing based on like another type of auth service that would make it really nice. So that's what we're looking for. Yeah, and like Brooks is going on in the thing, they're like swappable and key backend, keychain access. That's all the kinds of things I would love to see with this. We're always open. If someone like was really itching to try this, we'd love to see something like that. That'd be really cool. As like even just an example PR, even if you don't think you want it merged because you're like, I'm just toying around. That's the kind of thing we'd love to see. And if not, I think, like I said, as soon as we have someone trying to actually pilot this out somewhere, I would love to like get together with whoever's doing it out there in the community who's starting to like try to do this and think about the key management, so we can start to maybe design a solution around that kind of idea. Because the security model of wasmCloud is really good. I think we've talked about, now Jordan brought up there could probably be some better security in the like tooling side of it that's generating the stuff, but it also has led to this idea of, I think we can make the management of them a lot easier. So yeah, totally down to do that and open for ideas as we continue to improve and start running more of these types of things in production.
Well, I know this started as a developer iteration loop conversation, but I'm really happy with where it went. I really liked having the security conversation. I was planning on queuing it up for next week if we didn't go this deep into it today, but I've got some really good notes. I think it could be worth, I'd like to hear a little bit more of Jordan's perspective on the other end. I'm assuming he, like a bear chewed on his Ethernet cord or something, and he didn't just rage quit from something that Victor said, that we said around security. So I'd like to hear more of his perspective. So it might be worth queuing this up again for next week and getting some more ideas together, especially if somebody reaches out in the key management space on Slack, and that'd be neat. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to just say real quick. I assume I'm not speaking for anyone else, but I assume other people agree as well on the Cosmonic side that bad news is also good news, right? I feel like Jordan was a little hesitant to like share like something he didn't like, but I think that feedback's often extremely useful. So if you're feeling pain, please tell us, because then we can stop it. We can, or at least do something about it. And like the like for example, the auditability call out, which I see, or I'm interpreting kind of like the supply chain security, right? That's been a bit of a like, that's been growingly like been implemented more and more recently. That's another thing that I think just talking about helps us sort of plan for the future and keep an eye on features that people think about, right? So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, these discussions are, that's a great call out, Victor. Some of these discussions where it can be a good thing or a bad thing that starts it, or some of the most valuable discussions. We on the maintainer side try to queue up cool things. If you have something that you'd like to talk about, like what Justin brought up, which I think we could talk about for 30 minutes on a community call, always feel free to suggest them for the next community meeting. They're always open agendas. We can always modify that and talk about things that people want to chat about, especially when it comes in contact with wasmCloud. All right, everyone. I think we've got just a couple of minutes left in the community call. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to bring up in terms of the wasmCloud ecosystem, or maybe broader WebAssembly land? I know that we've got a lot of updates, but just want to give the last couple of minutes for open time there. All right, everyone. Well, I think we'll go ahead and call it there. I will actually be back in my normal location next week. And so I will see all of you for the wasmCloud community meeting on the